Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And a very, very warm welcome to this high-level report launch. And of course, our report is titled A Multi-Billion-Dollar Opportunity, Repurposing Agricultural Support to Transform Food Systems, jointly led by the United Nations Environment Programme, the United Nations Development Programme, and of course, the Food and Agriculture Organization. My name is Nozipho Shabalala, and it is an absolute privilege to serve you as the moderator of today's critically important conversation. Now, just as we get into it, let's turn our attention to this audio visual that really sets the scene for us and brings our understanding and anchors us around the report. And from there, we're going to go into a series of robust conversations. For now, here's a short video to set the scene. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The invitation is clear. It's an invitation to rethink, to reform, and to repurpose. And of course, we know that food systems are the heartbeat of our 2030 agenda. It is the only way in which we might make progress towards eliminating poverty in all its forms, towards reducing hunger, towards achieving food security, of course, towards sustainable agriculture and combating climate change as well. And of course, today's conversations and today's launch take place at a very tiniest time in our history. And this is, of course, when we have on the horizon the UN Food Systems Summit, which of course represents an opportunity for the global community to collectively pause, to really embrace this conversation and this invitation to rethink, to reform, and to repurpose as we think about transforming our food systems and repurposing existing support. And so in the time that we have together, you are going to be hearing from the heads of UN agencies that are leading this charge. You're going to be hearing from ministers who are translating this aspiration to real impact on the ground. You'll also get a presentation of the contents and the recommendations that are coming out of the report, and an opportunity to engage with our presenter through a fireside opportunity that we're going to open it up. And of course, we're going to bring you a technical panel discussion where we're going to be really tapping insights from different experts for their expertise and their perspectives in this conversation. As always, we really love to hear your voice. So you are invited to please send us your questions, send us your comments. I think you might have seen in the chat already the netiquette for this conversation, but we do want to hear from you, and we'll try and integrate your voice into the conversation as much as possible. We are also amplifying this conversation on social media, and the hashtag that we are using is Repurpose Ag Support. Repurpose Ag Support. Let's bring some visibility to the conversation across our different social media platforms. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to transition into our high-level remarks. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to open the floor for the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Akim Steiner, as he extends this statement in the form of his high-level remarks.
My dear colleague Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, my dear colleague Dong Yu Kyu, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When governments spend public money, citizens expect positive results. Yet the report that we are launching today shows that this is often far from reality. It illustrates how almost 90% of global government spending on support to agricultural producers is contributing to the climate crisis and to the degradation and destruction of our natural world. Bolstered by such supports, it outlines how outsized meat and dairy sectors in high-income countries account for nearly 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, as just one example. It also demonstrates how import tariffs and export subsidies are contributing to higher food prices and less nutritious food. This situation is exacerbating inequalities, like poorer health, for example. In short, the vast majority of the $540 billion spent every year in global support to producers in the agricultural sector is holding back our efforts to achieve the global goals. And it is hindering progress towards the objectives of the Paris Agreement. At this pivotal moment for people and planet, this eye-opening report is helping to spur a radical rethink on the global approach to agricultural support. It does not suggest that such support should simply be eliminated. It calls for it to be repurposed and used to shift our agri-food systems in a greener, more sustainable direction. This includes rewarding good practices, such as paying farmers to practice sustainable farming and adopt climate-smart approaches. The report projects that such measures could drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, some 55 million tons of carbon dioxide annually by the year 2030. It would help to ramp up decisive climate action that we now need. Incentivizing greener agriculture will also help to restore millions of hectares of degraded land and ecosystems. It will boost the livelihoods of the 500 million smallholder farmers worldwide, many of them women, by ensuring a more level playing field. And it will enhance food security and improve nutrition at a time when 720 million people still go to bed hungry every night. The report also offers a clear pathway forward. It presents 6 concrete steps that governments can take to make this transition. Energized by the Food Systems Summit, COP26 and CBD COP15, countries have an opportunity to take bold action, to rethink, repurpose and reform counterproductive forms of agricultural support. Doing so will help to transform and modernize global agri-food systems, making them healthier, more sustainable, more equitable, and yes, more efficient. Thank you.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That clarion call once again is loud and clear, but perhaps also lifting up from the invitation to radically rethink. But beyond that, offering a clear pathway of bold actions that all of us as part of the international community can take. It is an opportunity to make this decade of action count. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure right now to welcome onto this virtual stage the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Director General Chu Dong-yu. The floor, sir, is yours.
Thank you, moderator, and excellencies, dear colleagues Akim and Inga Anderson, ladies and gentlemen. Our agri-food systems are facing difficult challenges and need our collective commitment. Current trend shows we are not providing necessary support for transformation of agri-food systems to be more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. It is time to rethink, repurpose, reform, and restart. Today's report clearly points out that we have at hand a $1 trillion opportunity, not a billion. You are underestimated because now there are more opportunity from the private sector and the farmers. When you only account public spending and investment, it's very limited. So that's why I said $1 trillion opportunity. Not only 1 trillion, maybe several trillions globally. If you look at the bigger countries, United States, China, and Brazil, and Europe, and Russia. So there are a lot of investment, not only from government. So we need, that's is really $1 trillion opportunity to repurpose government support together with the private sector and family farmers to the agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all, leaving no one behind. This is also at the core of the FAO Strategic Framework 2022 to 2031. About 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020, as many as 161 million more than in 2019, and nearly 2.737 billion people did not have access to adequate food. Health deaths are out of reach for the around 3 billion people. We are clearly not on track to achieve the SDG 2 and SDG 1 by 2030. And we only have 9 seasons in which to do so. At the same time, with the pandemic still hitting us hard, and with the continued devastating impact of the climate crisis, to achieving all the SDGs have become even more daunting. Dear colleagues, agri-food systems are essential to achieve the SDGs, but this cannot be accomplished without their transformation to address today's realities. There are several entry points for this transformation, and agri-policies are key. Agri-food systems feed and nourish us all, and are the source of the livelihood of billions of people. Yet the current agri-food support policy are steering us away from ensuring a sustainable future for generations to come. Globally, about $540 billion from the government are spent per year supporting agri-food systems at a time when the many countries' public financial are constrained in the face of the pandemic, and also before pandemic, there's some slowdown of the economic development, economic downturn after the financial crisis since 2008, still not recovered. It is unacceptable that more than half of this support contributed to the distorted price, unsustainable production with negative impact on the environment. Furthermore, many small farmers do not have access to the financial lifeline and services. And billions of dollars are not being invested for the supporting the production and the post-harvest handling of nutritious food for health deaths. We must find a better way to repurpose this support, and also to lead engagement of private sector to invest more. These resources must be diverted towards the investment in public goods and the service for agri-food systems, such as infrastructure, research and development, and assistance to young farmers and startups. Repurposing means not only spending more, but also financing better. We must eliminate the bottlenecks that are holding back potential by increasing institutional coordination and upskilling civil servants to better implement the project. Dear colleagues, there is a momentous opportunity before us, $1 trillion opportunities to improve the lives of people and the planet. How do we do that? The report set out 6 concrete steps for government to implement a repurposing strategy with all stakeholders. So again, government, you can play the leading role to orient the investment and also services. With the UN Food Systems Summit around the corner, it is the perfect opportunity for the world to commit to bold actions and also more stronger, clear political commitment from all over the world, from all the head of state, and also key players of all the participants. FAO is committed to support its members and work closely with all the partners to transform our agri-food systems globally for a better world with no hunger and no extreme poverty. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Director General. And of course, it is right on message as you talk to us about reframing this opportunity. You're saying we've got the number wrong. It's not $1 billion opportunity. It's $1 trillion opportunity, and maybe several trillions of dollars of opportunity. And of course, the Director General of the FAO, they're highlighting that we need to begin to look beyond public sector spending and really think about the innovative ways in which we can bring the private sector to the party, in which we can bring family farms. And so as we think about the rethink that's required, the reform that's required for food systems, let's ensure that we are reforming and rethinking and repurposing towards more efficiency, more inclusion, more resilience, but most importantly, that leaves no one behind. It's a massive thank you to the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to make way for a statement of a high-level remark that comes from the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, that being UNEP, of course. And this is to now open up the floor to Madame Inga Anderson as she invites us to reimagine and take action against the triple threat of climate change.
The food we eat is a bedrock of our health. Isn't it then ironic that the way we, humanity, produces and distributes this food is making the planet and so us sick? Unsustainable farming that drives destruction of nature, significant greenhouse gas emissions across the food supply chain, the drawing down of dwindling water resources, fertilizers and pesticides that pollute the environment, food waste and loss that means a large part of these impacts come without even feeding a single hungry mouth. Through these and other practices, often supported by governments, food systems contribute to the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. A crisis that is accelerating and making life harder for smallholder farmers across the world. A crisis that is affecting food security and prices. A crisis that is wiping out entire crops and livelihoods in some places. This report shows that governments are throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at supporting the practices that make our food systems unsustainable. Money that frequently support big industry and not small-scale producers. It doesn't have to be this way, though. If agricultural support is repurposed, including through policy reforms, investments in research and development, and improved social protection, it can make food systems sustainable, efficient, and equitable. It can make nutritious and diverse diets more affordable, bringing better health outcomes. It can restore nature rather than destroy it. I'd like to thank our partners, UNDP and FAO, who co-produced this report. Thanks are also due to WHO, IMF, and the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, for their contributions, enabling us all to speak in one voice on this important issue. This voice is saying that governments have the opportunity to make efficient use of their resources to redefine our relationship with nature and to reduce the likelihood and impact of pandemics, conflicts, economic crises, migration, and environmental shocks. The UN Food Systems Summit, the Climate COP, and the Biodiversity COP are on the horizon. At these events, the international community has a chance to commit to repurposing agricultural support following the blueprint outlined in this report. We must take it.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The blueprint is in the report. We have the opportunity to take it and run with it. Of course, Madame Anderson reminding us that it doesn't have to be this way. The food systems that we nurture can be food systems that restore nature rather than destroy nature. This is an opportunity to move towards food systems that are more sustainable, that are more efficient, and of course, more equitable. I do also want to just acknowledge our audience, and I can see you're quite active in the chat, and to keep encouraging you to share those reports and share those resources, but also be mindful that we have a Q&A section as well. So when we get into our report presentation and when we get into the panel discussion, we're we're really going to try and open up the space so that you can have your share of voice in this launch conversation as well. For now, though, we're moving from our high-level remarks and we're making our way to our opening remarks. One of the things that I promised you is that we're going to hear from ministers who have the mandate to really translate these aspirations, to take the 6 concrete steps and translate them into tangible action, practical outcomes on the ground. And with that, then, it is my absolute pleasure to open up the floor to the Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources from Rwanda, the Honorable Minister, Dr. Geraldine Mukeshima, who is standing by, and to say to you, your Honorable Minister, the floor is yours. That's Honorable Minister Geraldine Mukeshimana, who is now standing by. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished participants. Through the food system dialogues, we all have learned that we need to change the way we produce, transport, trade, even the way we consume. I therefore believe that repurposing agricultural support to transform food system will happen in a way or another, as it is no longer sufficient to do business as usual. In Rwanda, we strongly believe that producing sufficient and nutritious food is still our highest priority for food and nutrition security, but also for income of millions small-scale farmers and SMEs that are involved in food value chains. This call first of the deployment of research and innovation technologies that are supportive to increase agricultural productivity, invest in post-harvest loss management, as well as supporting our producers to be resilient towards climate change by investing in irrigation, erosion control, and other climate smart technologies. The government of Rwanda continue to invest in transport infrastructures, including the rural roads, energy, and IT tools to support market linkages, as well as providing social protection mechanisms that are needed to cater for the most vulnerable. As we continue to figure out how to enhance access to agricultural finance, we strongly believe that continuous efforts to empower youth and women in all aspects of food systems are very critical for inclusiveness and sustainable food systems. Therefore, in Rwanda, we continue to encourage farmers to work in cooperatives in order to easily access benefits that are associated with economies of scale. We are also supporting agriculture insurance schemes to de-risk the sector for the farmers. We also promote contract farming in order to protect vulnerable farmers who are engaged in the markets. We continue to fund research and development for productivity enhancing technologies while striving to provide conducive conditions for the private sector investments. The report that is being presented today, it shows us that agricultural support policies around the world are yet to be effective in supporting the achievement of our SDGs targets. This requires all of us to adjust and twist what we can twist to fit our food systems for the people, the planet, and the prosperity. Thank you.
Honorable Minister Mukeshimana, thank you very much for those messages. And what you have done through that contribution of your opening remark is really just reflected to us what is possible if we really look to rethink, reform, and repurpose. You have highlighted the inclusion of small-scale farmers, just as the Director General Dong Yu had invited us to think about. You've spoken about the inclusion of small and medium-sized enterprises, and not just focusing on big business. You've given us the example of transport infrastructure that really enhances those market linkages. You've spoken about social protection to ensure that those that have variable income in the sector are protected, or looking at insurance products that make agri-finance within reach, and just so much that you have shared in your opening remark. It certainly is fuel that allows us to move even with more purpose towards the recommendations and the 6 concrete steps as defined in the report. A very big thank you to you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, we stay now within our opening remarks. We're making our way to a Member of Parliament for North Oxfordshire and Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Farming, Fisheries and Food, this in the United Kingdom. It's my pleasure now to share a message in the form of an open remark from the Honourable Minister Victoria Prentice, extending her remarks to this opening session. Let's listen now to this short statement.
As Minister for Farming, Fisheries and Food in the United Kingdom, I really welcome this report and its practical contribution to a critical agenda, repurposing public policies and support for sustainable agriculture and food systems. Over the last decades, we've seen a tremendous increase in food production, with benefits for food security, economic growth and poverty reduction. Yet these successes are increasingly at risk, undermined by the current costs of agricultural practices. Agriculture is a key driver of climate change and a main cause of biodiversity loss, and we're all seeing the consequences in climate and environmental disasters. Food producers are often on the front line, and global hunger has been rising since 2014. We need to work together to address this crisis. This report highlights how coherent policymaking for agriculture can result in real and significant benefits for the environment and human health. It contributes useful evidence and guidance to a broader international effort through the UN Food Systems Summit and through the COP26 Sustainable Agriculture Campaign. By repurposing current agricultural producer support, governments can seize the opportunity to optimise scarce public resources in ways to support food systems that make them not only more efficient, but also more supportive of healthy lives, nature and climate. In the UK, we're working towards this goal by shifting from land use subsidies to a new set of environmental land management schemes that will reward farmers for better environmental outcomes. But we can't do this in isolation. We're consulting our farmers, our farm businesses and others to design new systems that work for people, prosperity and our planet. Under the COP26 campaign, the UK and World Bank are co-hosting a policy dialogue to raise visibility and build momentum of efforts to redirect public support for sustainable agriculture. The dialogue has produced a policy action agenda setting out ambition and guidance, and I invite your endorsement of this agenda. This is a challenging endeavour. No one has the easy answers, but these are changes we all need to make for a food secure system. I look forward to hearing more about the technical aspects of the report and hope that you are as encouraged as I am by what you hear today.
It's a very big thank you to you, Honourable Minister Prentice, reminding us, of course, as we've heard already, that we are off track when we consider our sustainable development goals, especially as we look to eliminating hunger in all its forms, especially as we look at ending poverty in all its forms. And the invitation here that she highlights, the invitation towards coherent policy making and the opportunity that that opens up. And of course, the opportunity to optimize already scarce resources so that we're not only achieving efficiency, but we're also achieving healthy outcomes for people and planet. We thank her for also sharing, of course, the dialogue between the World Bank and the UK, and of course, coming out of that, the action agenda, as always, always in support of conversations that become the birthplace of action. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our segment on opening remarks. It's my pleasure now to transition us as we go now to engage with the report itself. We are now going to welcome Mr. Marco Sanchez, who is the Deputy Director looking after agro-food economics at FAO, to really just walk us through some of the key elements of the report. I am extending a very specific invitation to you at this point to engage with what you're hearing, to send us any comments, to send us any questions that you might like me to put to Marco at the end of his presentation. Again, noticing the action in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to lift some of the themes and the issues that you've raised there into the panel discussion, which will follow. For now, allow me to welcome Marco onto the floor. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nosy. Allow me to first ask you if you can see the screen now.
Thank you, Marco. We can see your screen. Might you just swap the display settings so we can see it in presentation mode?
Can you see it well now?
That's it. So Marco, if you go back to display settings and you just swap the settings so that we can only see what you're presenting. There we go. Thank you so much, Marco. Over to you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much, Nosy. It's an honor for me to join the heads of agencies and, of course, the excellencies, the ministers, and also the distinguished panelists in launching this report. I also want to thank my co-authors of the report for giving me the opportunity to represent them all in this technical presentation, and also the three institutions that have jointly published the report. As we all know, food systems support several SDGs, not only food security and nutrition, but also in many other sustainability realms. Food systems have made impressive strides in producing food to feed a growing population with more food safety. However, what we have seen is that these contributions are showing limits because of wrong management. For example, and some of these statements have already been provided, agriculture contributes to land conversion and biodiversity loss, pollutes air and waterways, and is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions. Moreover, the world produces enough food, but around 3 billion people in the world do not have access to healthy diets. To fix this, we are all saying food systems need transformation. Now, there are several entry points to transforming food systems. The report identifies agricultural support as one of these key entry points. Support given to farmers in particular is not fairly distributed and has also promoted some farming practices that are harmful to nature and our health. What then we do about this? Well, this is the question that this report answers. The answer, in our view, is very simple. We need to rethink and repurpose agricultural producer support. Repurposing means to reduce support measures that are inefficient, unsustainable, and inequitable, in order to replace them with measures that are the opposite. This means support is not eliminated, but reconfigured. Therefore, repurposing will always imply reforms. We need reforming the rules of the game, including laws, regulations, and institutions. The next question then is, how do we do that? Through this joint report, FAO, UNDP, and UNEP, and other contributors, including IFPRI, for example, precisely provide guidance for countries on how to repurpose their agricultural producer support. Let's have a look at the evidence from the report. Agricultural support mostly targets farmers individually. Worldwide, support to farmers corresponds to $540 billion yearly on average. As the yellow bar shows in the graph, more than half this amount which is almost $294 billion, is provided to farmers through price incentive policies. The rest are fiscal subsidies that target farmers individually. About 70% of these fiscal subsidies are given to farmers because they produce a specific crop or they use a specific input or factor of production. We call these capital subsidies in the report, as they are tied to the production of a commodity. Farmers, of course, have reason to view these as good policies most of the time. For example, a price incentive or a fertilizer subsidy reduces the production cost for them. Or, for example, a trade agreement that guarantees access to markets for a crop will prompt farmers to invest in that crop. What is the problem then? Well, as we argued in the report, price incentives are the result of border measures and market interventions through, for example, import tariffs, duties, quotas, and fixed or floor prices that keep producers' prices above the market level. In this way, they distort prices, trade, production, and also consumption decisions. Similarly, fiscal subsidies tied to production can lead to negative environmental outcomes, for example, through overuse of natural resources or the promotion of monoculture. Or they can also lead to adverse nutritional outcomes, for example, by disproportionately fostering production of staples versus fruits and vegetables. Now, in addition to these measures, governments also support agricultural producers more collectively through the provision of, for example, general sector services and public goods, including, for example, infrastructure and research and development. Look at the green bar in the graph, the gray bar, sorry, in the graph on the right-hand side. Unfortunately, as you can see in that gray bar, this support is only $110 billion yearly. Even if we know the evidence shows that this type of support is less distorting, more equitable, and returns are higher in the medium to long term. How countries support agriculture, of course, varies widely according to their policy objectives and tends to change as countries develop, as this graph helps us see. In high-income countries, for example, most support to farmers is through price incentives, but the trend has been downward until very recently. Distorting measures have become more prominent in some middle-income countries, where price incentives and other support linked to production, especially input subsidies, now account for over 10% of agricultural production value on average. Now, in most low-income countries, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, fiscal support to agriculture is minimal, and the farming sector has actually been penalized, even more so in the past, by price distorting policies that keep producers' prices low to protect poor consumers. The most emission-intensive commodities, such as beef, milk, and rice, or unhealthy ones like sugar, receive the most support, which also hinders production diversification. So, keeping support as usual, global support to farmers is projected in the report to reach almost $1.8 trillion by 2030. While this trajectory is very dangerous, removing agricultural policy support altogether to avoid it will also have important trade-offs. Let me show you some examples of these trade-offs. The report projects what would happen if global agricultural support measures were to have been removed by 2030. Results show an overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to keeping support as usual, as shown in this graph for different measures, border measures, fiscal subsidies, and they together. This result, as you can see, is mostly driven by the global elimination of border measures, which would result in an increase in crop and livestock production. However, they would also be achieved towards more confined feeding operations with less deforestation and land conversion for pasture globally and an associated fall in greenhouse gas emissions. But the overall reduction in emissions globally will not come without trade-offs. As this table shows, with all support dismantled by 2030, global crop production would fall by 1.3% and livestock production by 0.2% by 2030, with rising prices in most scenarios reported in the report. This result is mostly driven by the elimination of fiscal subsidies, as the evidence clearly shows. With agricultural production falling, of course, it is unsurprising that less land and other natural resources are being used and that emissions are then projected to decline. But removing all support will also hurt farmers' income, particularly in developed countries. This, of course, would affect global income inequality, and there could also be adverse effects on food consumption. Let's have a look at those projected effects on food consumption under the assumption that we are going to eliminate all agricultural producer support. As you can see, the elimination of agricultural producer support is projected to have disparate effects on global per capita consumption of various food groups, depending on the type of support and economic classification of the country. As you can see in the graphs, removing border measures, those that provide price incentives, is expected to lead to higher per capita consumption of some food items, such as sugar, which tends to be highly protected at the moment. Removal of fiscal subsidies largely has a negative income effect on farmers, which contributes to lower per capita food consumption across all the food consumption items reported in the graph. Again, in light of this evidence, removing agricultural support comes with trade-offs, but business as usual is not an option either. So what do? We say in the report, we need to repurpose agricultural producer support. In the report, to do that, we propose 6 steps, specifically to implement an agricultural producer support strategy that is coherent with healthy, sustainable, equitable, and efficient food systems. The guide starts with the estimation of the support already provided, which is step 1, and how it impacts agriculture and food systems, which is step 2. Step 3 to step 5 represent the main actions in the formulation, finalization, and implementation of the repurposing strategy. In step 3, the identification of the reforms takes place. In step 4, the outcomes are forecasted. In step 5, the formal adoption of new laws, enactment of regulations, and implementation of required changes to institutions takes place. Step 6 pertains to the monitoring and evaluation of the repurposing strategy after implementation. The implementation of these steps, of course, has to be informed by the peculiarities of the local context. And talking about the local context, obviously, any repurposing support strategy will face challenges, in particular resistance, institutional gaps, and bureaucracy. So the report also proposes solutions to overcome them, based on a number of case studies from all types of countries at different types of development. And we learned that these solutions include stakeholder engagement, working with transparency and communication, and working for the concrete socioeconomic context. To conclude, we need to shift from distorting and harmful forms of agricultural producer support, such as price incentive measures and coupled subsidies, to support that is well targeted, decoupled from production, and that incorporates conditions to improve productivity and reduce negative environmental impacts and achieve better health and equity outcomes. We need to scale up expenditure and investment for the provision of public goods and services for agriculture, in particular infrastructure and research and development that helps develop environmentally friendly technologies and supports climate adaptation and risk management measures, while helping to create, of course, economies of scale. Mitigation measures, such as cash transfer schemes, will be needed to address any short-term negative implications of repurposing and reforming. Now, in the context of the COVID-19 induced economic downturn, repurposing is crucial, given the fiscal constraints that many countries are facing, particularly low-income countries. Also, it is important to take advantage of COVID-19 recovery packages to scale up greener, climate-smart support to agriculture that is inclusive of all actors, including women, indigenous populations, and so on. And let's do this with transparency, consultation, and of course, gender sensitiveness. Overall, repurposing agricultural support is a unique opportunity to transform food systems, but it will not happen without a strong backing of governments and leveraging urgent action at upcoming international events, beginning this September with the Food Systems Summit. I thank you very much for your attention.
Marco, it's an excellent presentation, and I know that we've got up on screen now our technical panel discussion that is about to come up, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. But before I let you go, Marco, I do want to bring your attention to a very quick question, if you could respond to that for me. We've got a really excellent question that's come from Redan, and Redan is saying, what role do you see for food trade diplomacy, Marco, especially as it relates to more equitable access to food, especially in times of crisis? Your quick comments on the food trade diplomacy, Marco.
I'm not a diplomat and an economist, so probably my answer will be biased by that. But I think it's a very interesting question. Trade takes center stage in the report, because as we are arguing in the report, you know, a lot of the let's say support measures that we see can have some distorting blows in markets related to trade. So that, of course, somehow, and most of the time also, is leading to an inefficient allocation of resources to international trade. So now, how do we fix that? You know, there are vested interests. Countries will have their own position on how to do this. You will need trade diplomacy, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You know, we have the WTO, and one of the things we say in the report that we need to do in the medium term is, you know, to work with the trade community. And the trade community should also play an important role in pursuing further reform of border measures and capital subsidies. Of course, you will need diplomacy because there is losers and winners as everything we do that has a reform in between. So trade is going to be key in reforming and repurposing agricultural support. Government's willingness will be critical, but we need mediators. And we also need to engage with all the stakeholders such that those mediators can help us through that diplomatic work to raise voices from all the stakeholders that are engaged in this.
Marco, it's an excellent response, and I'll let you know that Stella Kimbambo in the chat has added, we can fix this by supporting nutrition-sensitive trade. And I'm sure it's a conversation that we could stay on for a while longer. But just to thank you, Marco Sanchez, for that report and really creating the space for us to engage with those 6 concrete actions. What I would like to do now is to invite my panelists to pop on their cameras. I can see them on. I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to start off by introducing Mr. Vijay Kumathalam. He is Executive Vice Chairperson or Chairman at Rayutu Sadhikara Samasta. This is a government corporation for farmers empowerment. And he was also Chief Secretary to the government looking after agriculture and cooperation development, this for the government of Andhra Pradesh in India. So it is a massive welcome to you, sir. Thank you very much for being here. Allow me to also quickly welcome Dr. Johan Swinnen. He is the Global Director of Systems Transformation at CGIAR, which of course is a global research partnership for a food secure future dedicated to reducing poverty and enhancing food and nutrition security, as well as improving natural resource outcomes. He's also the Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI, as you are seeing it on a screen. A very big welcome to you, Dr. Swinnen, for being here with us, and we look forward to your contribution. Anne Tatwala is with us. Anne is a senior advisor to Just Rural Transition. Anne, thank you for being here. Anne has served as a Director General of Biodiversity International, which is an agricultural research organization that is focused on using and safeguarding agricultural biodiversity to improve nutrition, to enhance resilience, and to support the conservation of genetic resources. As you can see it back on your screen, of course, are the panelists. But allow me now to acknowledge Madame Nicoletta Battini. She is lead evaluator at the International Monetary Fund, looking after the Independent Evaluation Office. She, prior to joining the IMF, Nicoletta was advisor to the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, also professor of economics at the University of Surrey, and the director of the International Economics and Policy Office of the Treasury in Italy. So massive welcome to you, Nicoletta. Thank you very much for being here with us. And last but certainly not least in this conversation, conversation is Dr. Francesco Branca. He is, of course, the director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization. And between 2008 and 2019, he was the director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development. And it's within this time that the WHO developed a nutrition strategy and established a new nutrition guideline development process, as well as having developed a really comprehensive implementation plan on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition within 6 global targets. Now, you'll see that we've also got some high-level closing remarks coming up, but I'm going to leave His Excellency Minister James Shaw for a little bit later in the conversation. So thank you very much. We can put that screen down because I want to really focus on our panelists right now. Vijay, I'm coming to you first with the first question. And here it is, Vijay. If we pause and we think about, the successful experiences, in particular of zero budget natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, first part of the question is, what is the key driver for that success in your view? And how should governments repurpose spending that was previously used to support inputs that are environmentally and socially harmful, which of course gets to the core of the conversation today. To you, Vijay. Vijay, if you could kindly unmute, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nozi, and it's an honor to be here on this panel. I would say the reason for success, there were multiple levers. If I can mention government support, the nature of the regenerative agriculture technology, the role of social capital, the role of a very decentralized extension system, and our assumption that this takes some time, so putting in place a long-term hand-holding system. So just to come back to this, the government of Andhra Pradesh saw the crisis in farmers' livelihoods as an opportunity to go into the root causes, not to do symptomatic treatment. So that is one very important change, I would say, in a government's thinking, that the government decided, let us go into the root causes. So that, I think, was a very powerful factor which made this happen. The other thing is the natural farming technology, which is, climate resilient, and it's also a mix of our indigenous technology with modern science. So it is future of agriculture, but rooted in Indian tradition. So that made it more acceptable to our farmers. And the third is a very important factor. We have a very strong women self-help group movement in the rural areas. So these women collectives, almost 90% of rural women in Andhra Pradesh have been organized into these collectives, and they're also financially very strong. They borrow money from the banks, promote their livelihoods, repay. So these women really provided the leadership for taking it to their members, hand-holding the members. And then the extension, knowledge dissemination was not top-down system. It was a farmer-to-farmer extension system. So a best practicing farmer took the knowledge to other farmers, and almost 60% of these farmer trainers are women. We have 6,000 such champion farmers. So they are the ones who are basically practicing it first, so walking the talk. So it's not just telling somebody to do it and you not doing it. And then we provided for long-term hand-holding support. But I must say the most important part has been the response of the farmers, and particularly women farmers. The men always talked about the income, the increase that happened to them, but women told me that their health had increased, had improved, children's health had improved. So I don't have much time for the second question, but if I can attempt it, there is no doubt in my mind that subsidies have to be repurposed, but there's also no doubt in my mind it's a very difficult call. Otherwise, it would have happened. The subsidies would not be mounting like this. So governments are reluctant to act on subsidies. I suggest a smart way. Governments must invest in climate smart agriculture because it improves livelihoods of farmers. By moving to climate smart agriculture, you are automatically eliminating some subsidies. So I may need more time to develop this, but I'll stop here, Nosy. I think I've run out of time.
Vijay, it's an excellent opening, and I do think the invitation to go back to what it really means to repurpose subsidies smartly is a conversation that I hope that we're going to be able to go back to. But you've lifted some really great insights that speak to the how. How do we go about it? What is some of the best practice that we've already seen? Some of the things that stand out for me is the framing of crisis and seeing that as an invitation to get to the root cause of the problem. It is the deliberate inclusion of indigenous knowledge systems in how we approach. It is ensuring that you're not disseminating information from the top down, but you're creating webs of information from the bottom up and ecosystems of information. There's just so much that you've shared with us, and I'm looking at a lot of the comments in the chat. One of the comments that I just want to lift, Vijay, because I think it speaks very much to what you've shared with us. It was a comment from Golbert Gibanu, and Golbert was saying, we can formulate policies all we want, but if those policies don't translate into actual plans against which we can execute, we haven't actually really done the work. And what I'm hearing you, Vijay, saying is, here's an example of what it looks like when the work is done. So maybe let me move from you then, Vijay. Let me go to Nicoletta. Nicoletta, there's quite a bit of a conundrum here in this conversation that we've got to unpack, because on the one hand, we know that the pandemic has created a need for stimulus. We also know that it's constrained countries' budgets, particularly in the developing world. The question then becomes, how can repurposing agricultural support be aligned with this reality and be a source of both recovery and food system transformation? Let me open up the floor to you, Nicoletta, as you take on that question.
Thank you, Nosy. And indeed, as you say, the pandemic has certainly triggered the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And this was largely the result of government measures to contain the spread of the pandemic itself. So to alleviate this, governments, since the beginning, accompanying these restrictions, lockdowns, measures with unprecedented monetary and fiscal stimuli to sustain growth. And it's calculated that in the 12 months to April of this year, the global fiscal boost was $16 trillion, according to the IMF. And so also, as you noticed, this response was skewed to advanced economies because emerging markets and developing economies didn't have as much to support and didn't have as much space in their policies to spend. But overall, the combination of the severe recession that we've been going through, and the unprecedented spending that came with it are posing great burdens on countries' fiscal houses. And one immediate consequence of this is that in the near but also distant future, there will be even less money to spend for anything, especially large structural economic transitions like the one on the food system. Secondly, given the sheer size of money that being spent now, spending decisions that are taken today are likely to have durable effects on the global economy and shape societies for decades to come. So what does it mean for agricultural subsidies? And we can start from the latest global shock, COVID itself. COVID crisis has caused a large number of deaths and economic hardship that is not being seen in many generations. But we do know that this pandemic is neither the first, unfortunately, nor the last that we'll see. And science indicates that unsustainable intensive agriculture, including deforestation and habitat encroachment, are the main culprit in the release of new and possibly lethal pathogens. So they create enormous pandemic risks. Since current agricultural subsidies incentivize intensive agriculture and deforestation, they are part of the problem. Because in economics, it's very obvious, we all know that economic incentives are what motivates people and companies to behave in a certain way. And globally, the agricultural sector has shown to be extremely responsive to subsidies in choosing what to farm and how to farm it. You could actually think of current food systems as nothing but the result of a careful and systematic public policy design of the last 70 years. So we have a way to turn this around, and we have a way to redress it. I would like to spend a second to talk about subsidies in intensive animal farming, because these are particularly pernicious. And the video at the beginning showed, in a sense, they are even worse than subsidies to fossil fuels, because raising tens of billions of animals, something that we can only do industrially, not only creates massive amounts of the most potent greenhouse gases, but they also impound most of the Earth's land for grazing or the production of feed for these animals, which basically means we're taking away land to produce food for people. So we are creating the hunger that we, are worried about. And also we contaminate waterways, oceans because of runoffs, and we pollute the atmosphere with ammonia, which is very toxic for humans. There's also great synergies with the oceans, not just because of the runoffs, but because we feed our farmed animals fish meal for protein, which could instead go to people. This report has been launched today. It doesn't talk about subsidies to commercial fishing or aquaculture, but these are also very harmful for people and planet. For example, the subsidies to marine diesel or high-tech equipment that helps, commercial vessels go down outside in high waters and plow the deep sea floor, which causes irreversible ecosystem damage. In a book I just edited, and here I conclude, and was published by the IMF and Island Press, called The Economics of Sustainable Food, we pinpoint to all this distortion caused by current food systems and policies, and we show how to redress these policies to make food systems work well for people and planet. And subsidies is really at the top of the agenda of the book. So just a few points. If we change subsidies and put them to good use in green land use, we can stabilize the Earth system, as shown by Johan Rockström in a recent documentary, Breaking Boundaries. Food system redressing is the only change that can fix all 9 planetary boundaries at once. We can have people access healthier diets, which are now expensive because of subsidies, induced price distortions in the healthy foods. We can make people more productive and less fiscally burdensome, because people can produce throughout their life instead of retiring prematurely, and they don't weigh on health system. And we can boost jobs and economic output. And this is statistically demonstrable. I just contributed to a paper that shows every dollar that we put into the current system returns less than $1. A lot of that money goes abroad to large corporations that get most of the subsidies, or to inputs like patented seed and fertilizer. So I cannot stress more. This report is an extremely important piece of work, and it goes right at the heart of what we need to do.
Nicoletta, thank you very much for that. There's been a lot of reaction as you're speaking in the chat. Andrea is saying excellent point and is asking, please, can we post the title of the book, which we certainly will do, Andrea, and I know Nadine is standing by to do that. If you scroll up, ladies and gentlemen, you'll also know that Nadine posted the hyperlink to the actual report if you want to access that as well. But while I have you, Nicoletta, if I can just get 30 seconds to get this question from Stamatios. And Stamatios is saying, how can frameworks be developed for the 6 steps outlined by Marco? But most importantly, he's saying, where would the financing come from, especially for developing countries? It's a big question, Nicoletta, and I'm asking you to take it in 30 seconds.
Well, I think, frameworks are in place, and that we have a structure of national government policies for these subsidies. So it's a question of retargeting, as Marco was saying, our goals. And in that, they're very specific to each countries. So there are things like, subsidies should be accompanied by cross-compliance requirements on, sustainability. At the moment, we just hand out subsidies independently of what they do. We should stop greenwashing subsidies. So some subsidies look for environmental purposes. They really are to build, like big pipes that bring the manure of intensive farms into lakes, and we call that, environmentally savvy. So, it's a number of actions that each government has to take, but we really need to retarget, where we're taking agriculture. So I think for the finance, you know, that's a big conversation, but the money is there. The demand for bonds and investment in green food system is tremendous. Governments need to do their part to really align, you know, the purpose of where we're taking and regulating the system such that that money, that capital can be unleashed immediately.
Nicoletta, thank you very much. And I suspect that it's continued conversation on the back of the insights that you've shared. And as you've highlighted, there's incredible demand, bonds and financial instruments. Regulatory aspects are still potentially a gap that we need to be looking at. So maybe with that, we're staying on the theme of finance. I want to go to Dr. Swin, and Johan, I'm coming to you with this next question. The question is, where should governments direct public finances in order to improve the climate resilience and mitigation capacities of their national food systems and our global agri-economy? And of course, this is quite an interesting question, because we've also heard, as the Director General, of course, of the FAO saying it's public finance and more. I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Nosy, and thanks for inviting me here. I definitely want to congratulate my colleagues from UNEP, UNDP, FAO for the report. I think it's really important and very timely, and we have been very happy to contribute some of the analysis for the work. Let me say first something on the size actually of the problem. And as Dr. Chu already said, I mean, it's a $1 trillion issue rather than a multi-billion-dollar issue. It's, in a way, it's a $1.5 billion per day issue, if you look at it, okay? And that's important to keep in mind. And why is it? Because, I mean, as part of the Food System Summit, we and colleagues have estimated that it takes roughly $350 billion of investment annually to reduce hunger, to get a much more sustainable food systems and diet system. And that is less than what we are currently spending. So I think it's important to put that in the framework of what we're talking about here. Now, how it's a complex issue. It would be easy if we could just say, basically, just do this and that will solve the problem. It is not. Actually, if you look at the estimates in just getting rid of the subsidies, it has surprisingly limited effect in a way on the overall environmental or the sustainability issues. Okay, so it's really, you have to be smart about how you're going to do that. All the analysis that you see shows that research and investment shifting is a substantive part. The research and investment has to be part of the answer. And so that is, so more research and investment for productivity enhancing, emission reducing technologies, and we should interpret this very broadly, management techniques, etc. Okay, and these returns on these investments are typically very high, and so we don't need to shift all of that there. Just a size of it will already have a significant effect. We already have a lot of management technologies, which are their ways of how we do farming, how our food system works. And so there the issue is much more getting the right set of incentives, the regulatory framework. And Nicoletta has mentioned several things. Other speakers have mentioned things as well. I don't have time to go in detail there, but clearly we have to shift the incentives there with adjusting the nature of the payments to farmers and to the food industry that we're giving. And then the third element is investments in infrastructure, investments, trying to incorporate the hidden costs of the food system into the new investment targets, if you want. So the combination of these things is probably gonna, and it can really make a very significant difference. We're talking about 30–40% of greenhouse gas reductions within a decade or 15 years probably. Let me just end by one point on the trade-offs, which has been, I mean, people have been mentioning it. I mean, Marco Sanchez also at the end referred to it, okay? And they're obviously there, okay? All the policies in the world that we have, also these agriculture support policies, they affect the global goods, if you want, the public goods, but of course they affect people's incomes as well, obviously. And so we have to be smart and careful in reforming these things, to think about the compensation schemes, to think about the transition systems there. And there are basically global trade-offs, because if we're going to change the systems, it may be that production systems are going to shift to other parts of the world, etc. But reform is possible. I mean, the history has shown it. If you look at the last 15, 20 years, I mean, major changes have occurred in agriculture support policies in different parts of the world. And I think 2021 this year is an excellent time with the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the vulnerability of what we have today, and also the entrepreneurship, both I think in the private sectors and in the public policy area. And so hopefully the combination of the Food Systems Summit, COP26, and the Nutrition for Growth Summit later will allow a global framework to bring this openness of thinking to significant changes. Thank you very much.
Johan, thank you very much. And I just want to link what you've said to what's just come through on the chat. So you might notice Craig Lawson has reminded us about the hashtag that we're using, Repurpose Ag Support, if you want to join the conversation. And certainly if there's one soundbite I'm going to be tweeting, it's the opportunity to really surface the hidden costs of food. And that's one of the many messages that we've just heard from Johan. And of course, bringing back the conversation and the focus to some of those trade-offs that Marco had begun to share with us. Johanna, I do want to sneak in a very quick question if I can, and it is a big question, but I'm going to sneak it in. One of the things that we heard right at the beginning, from Mr. Akim Steiner himself, many other speakers have spoken about it, is making sure that we do not leave women and smallholder farmers behind as we go about rethinking, reforming, repurposing. I'd love to just have a quick comment from you on that, to say, how do we reimagine agricultural support so that we break the blueprint of exclusion?
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue. I mean, if we look at the global farming system, I mean, by far the dominant group of the world who is farming are smallholders, and women play a very important role in that. We see also COVID-19 that there's been very significant gender effects in COVID-19 in developing countries, as women have suffered more from COVID-19 in general. And I think if we really want to address that issue, it goes beyond repurposing agricultural subsidies. I think we have to think this as much more broader systemic changes in going about it, but more particularly on clearly some of the research and development initiatives can focus on specific initiatives targeted to new ideas, management technologies focusing on smallholders, for example. And also it is known in the world globally that the subsidies are typically biased towards larger farms, mostly because of transaction costs in accessing subsidies, maybe more than, it depends a bit on the nature of the subsidy as well, to what extent that they are biased. Thank you.
Johan, it's excellent. And of course, it is a big conversation. As you've said, it's a very important element. And really what we're doing is bringing to the surface some of those conversational points that we have to engage with as we engage with the 6 concrete actions, the bold action opportunities that we can take coming out of the report. And I'm coming to you next. And as I come to you, I'm reminded of the words of Minister Prentice earlier on, where Minister Prentice was sharing with us about the dialogue happening between the World Bank and the United Kingdom, and ending off by saying beyond this dialogue is a certain agenda of action. So in that spirit of not having talk shops, of really looking at action, the question to you is, with the Food Systems Summit and COP26 coming up soon, how do we make sure that we carry this agenda forward beyond the launch of this report? So as we log off, this is not the end of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nosy. Just a couple of points. I mean, first of all, we've seen from both what Minister Prentice said and the Minister from Rwanda, this is about national governments. They are the ones who have to move this forward. It's not something that can be moved forward only in conversations and reports that have been released, even excellent reports like the one we're discussing today. I think it's really important that the national dialogues that have been initiated under the process of the Food Systems Summit continue as we go forward beyond, because that really needs to be the locus of the conversations. Secondly, I think there are a number of organizations, and many of them here, the authors of this report, WHO, IMF, I don't see the World Bank, but I'm sure they're part of this conversation, that can help support those countries as they're going forward and keeping this conversation alive not just in the food system and the climate COP, but as someone mentioned earlier, the Nutrition Summit, the Convention on Biological Diversity, policy reform, policy repurposing cuts across all of those topics, all of those issues. I think the point about peer-to-peer learning is really important. And this is something that my organization, the Just Rural Transition, is helping to do with the support of the UK government and others to ensure that countries can find some courage from talking to each other and some ideas about how to move this process forward. But if I can maybe skip to the second question that I've been asked, because I think it's important here. So this report puts out 6 points, 6 actions. I think there's a 7th that is missing here. And that is inclusive consultation. And that needs to happen all the way through the process, but very early on. The World Farmers Organization is very supportive of this idea of repurposing. We need to engage the farmers, small, large, women, et cetera, indigenous farmers in these processes if they are to be successful and if they are to take into account all the equity considerations that we've been touching on very lightly. As many people have said, this is complex. We are asking our food system not only to produce more food, but to do all of these other things for us. And that is the core, are the farmers who need to be on board and be part of developing the solutions. So with that, I will hand back. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I must say that that very first point really sticks out. We need to help governments find the courage, because one of the themes that really has come out is that there is, of course, there are the plans, there are the policies, but it is then the courage to act around those concrete 6 steps. There was an earlier question that was posted from our audience saying, is there a hand-holding guide that would help us move from the 6 steps to actual practical action on the ground? And this is what I'm hearing as a theme. And of course, and coming back and saying, well, maybe there is a 7th recommendation that we need to be thinking about. Let me make my way to Dr. Branca. And Dr. Branca, as I come to you, I really want to bring human health into the frame in the conversation now. Maybe a broad question first. Why is it important to transform food systems in the context of improving human health? And might you also comment on how could redirecting government finances towards healthier foods and production methods benefit the public health system?
Oh, Nosy, thank you for this very important question. And let me also congratulate with the authors of the report. It's really timely. The fact of the matter is that the food system is failing us in multiple ways. It's not doing what it's meant to do, which is feed people. We have over 800 million people who are suffering from hunger. And then, as Marco was saying, there's 3 billion people who cannot afford a healthy diet. So the kind of food which is available doesn't allow people to have a healthy diet. And this is, of course, producing enormous effect on people's health. We have, what we call the double burden of undernutrition and overweight. We have still 150 million children with stunting. And at the same time, we have, about 400 million children and adolescents with overweight and obesity, 13% of the world population which is obese. So that doesn't work. And this is producing enormous health effect. I mean, if you put together the impact of unhealthy diet, that of obesity, of undernutrition, we get to, about 15 million deaths every year, which is, basically the top risk factor of the global burden of disease. But that's not the only connection between food system and health. I think Nicoletta already mentioned another important one, which is the way we produce food. For example, with intensive livestock production and the use of antibiotics in livestock production, which produces antimicrobial resistance. We heard about having an impact on nature and getting closer to those habitats that then put us at a greater risk, with zoonosis. But also we have a big issue around unsafe food still being distributed. In the chat, I read a lot about environmental contamination and degradation. It is true. We're making an inappropriate use of pesticides and fertilizers. And last but not least, the occupational hazard. So all this is producing enormous public health impact. Only the unhealthy diet also is producing incredible economic impact. I mean, if we consider the cost of the unhealthy diet on health costs, it's about 1.3 trillion per year, which is close to what we were saying. You know, the kind of numbers that we're talking about, it's an enormous impact.
Dr. Branco, it's an excellent reflection. You know, as you really pick up from that double burden, that is a reflection of the reality. I see there's a quick summary that's been put in the chat by Lena May saying food systems impact on health, and here's the summary, but also lifting up some of those elements of the way we produce food, how unsafe that food can be. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are 9 minutes away from the end of our conversation. So I'm going to give my panelists a challenge. And while they are reflecting on the challenge, I am going to go to the final closing remark, which is going to come from one of our ministers. There's a lot of comments, and I am going to come back to the comments. I've got my team also saying, Nosy, don't forget this person. So allow me to do this. Here's the challenge to my panelists. We're going to go to a short video now. And while you're paying attention to that video, I'd like you to think of a tweet that when we come out of the video, you're going to tell me what your tweet is. And the tweet, remember, ladies and gentlemen, is 140 characters. So I'm not looking for more than 10 words. And the tweet needs to capture the opportunity that we have right now. An easy thing to do is to start off with the opportunity to, and then to complete the sentence, the opportunity to. Right now, though, let's hear from His Excellency Minister James Shaw, the Minister of Climate Change and Associate Minister for Environment and Biodiversity, this from New Zealand. Here's a closing statement from the Minister.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I want to start by briefly taking you back to 1984. At that time, nearly 40% of the gross income of Aotearoa New Zealand's sheep and beef farmers was coming from government subsidies. Subsidies that for years had encouraged overproduction, discouraged innovation, and incentivised farmers to move into areas where New Zealand did not have a traditional comparative advantage. A year later, every one of those subsidies was gone. The result? Farming practices adjusted and productivity increased significantly. Farmers became more efficient and competitive. Today, agriculture continues to make a significant contribution to New Zealand's GDP and is our largest export sector. My point here is simple. A thriving and prosperous agricultural sector is consistent with the elimination of subsidies. This is not to say that New Zealand's experience did not come without challenges. We still have our fair share of environmental problems, and addressing these is a priority, particularly when it comes to water quality, biodiversity, and climate change. But the important thing is that subsidies are not making the challenge harder than it needs to be. Rather, the elimination of subsidies allowed producers to be agile and respond to market signals, creating a more innovative, efficient, and sustainable agricultural sector. Their removal also allows governments the space to develop more meaningful and targeted ways of delivering on the goal of a prosperous farming sector founded on a thriving natural environment. Here in New Zealand, our government is working in partnership with the agricultural sector and with Māori to develop a farm-level emissions pricing system that will measure, price and reduce agricultural greenhouse gases from 2025. We are also reforming the way that we manage our freshwater and significant Indigenous biodiversity. With all of these policies, we think about how we can support our farmers to adjust their practices and to achieve our shared goals in ways that are best suited to their circumstances. When it comes to your own conversations about taking the lessons from this report and looking at how support can be repurposed, there are two things that I want to stress. First, that any repurposed support does not lead to trade or production distorting outcomes. And second, that repurposed support needs to actually achieve its intended environmental outcomes. I'm sure that the farmers and the farm workers in your countries have been at the front line of efforts to keep populations healthy and safe during the pandemic, as they have here in New Zealand. We each owe an enormous debt of gratitude to these people. We just need to consider the way to support their sector and the environment we all rely on. So, let's ensure that today's report is a conversation starter, both in our own governments and globally, a chance to stimulate global cooperation and domestic action on this important issue. Agriculture is so obviously dependent on a stable climate and a healthy environment. So it's about time, I think, to consider how subsidising the sector may well be harming its long-term prosperity. Aotearoa New Zealand has been a long-standing supporter of work to identify and eliminate trade distortive and environmentally harmful subsidies. For example, we've been working for many years now to reform fossil fuel subsidies, including through our efforts to negotiate a world-leading agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability. We look forward to building on this work and advocating for a managed transition away from environmentally harmful agricultural subsidies in ways that support workers and communities to adjust. With that, I'd like to thank the authors and contributors on pulling together this very impressive and comprehensive report. I'd also like to thank the United Nations Environment Programme, the United Nations Development Programme, and the Food and Agricultural Organisation for their work. And I wish you all very well for your launch event.
So a very big thank you to the Honourable Minister Shaw, really lifting up some of those principles we've got to look for. Let's avoid distortions, he says, but also let's make sure that any repurposing measures actually achieve the intended outcomes. I've got 3 minutes, so back to the challenge. I've given my panelists a good solid 5 minutes to think about their quick tweet. Johan is smiling the most, so I think he probably has something up his sleeve. So Johan, I'm going to come to you first. It's a tweet, Johan, so I'm going to expect it to be very brief. What's the tweet of the day?
The opportunity to reform is today. We cannot afford to let it go unused, and this report provides important insights on how to do this.
Thank you very much. The opportunity to reform is today. That's the tweet. And that's the tweet to beat, I think, so far. So, Anne, I'm going to come to you. I'm seeing a competitive glint in your eye as you respond maybe to Johan now. What's your tweet for today?
On top of what Johan just said, or Yo just said, I think this is the opportunity to jointly achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the goals of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Paris Agreement, and it is the sine qua non. If we don't do this, we cannot achieve those objectives.
And it's excellent. This is the opportunity to jointly achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And you're saying if we don't do this, we're not going to get there. That's Anne Taitwala. She is Senior Advisor to Just Rural Transition. I'm scanning my panelists to see who looks most ready. Vijay, I think you can beat both of the tweets we've heard so far. What's your response? This is an opportunity to do what?
Yeah, no, I don't want to beat anybody. I just want to supplement what they said. They were excellent messages. I would say the opportunity to transform food system requires us to put farmers and farm workers at the center and support them in their journey to nature positive farming to benefit their own livelihoods, people's health and planetary health. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. So that's what we call a tweet and a retweet and a little subtweet as well. But I think it's absolutely excellent, really putting farmers and farmer workers at the center. So let me go to Dr. Branco. Francesco, let me come to you. I'm going to close it off with Nicoletta, but let's go to you, Dr. Branco.
So to me, it's an opportunity to align public policies and financial instruments to support production and consumption of healthy, sustainable diets.
Thank you very much, Dr. Branco. It's an opportunity to align public and public policy and financial instruments. I think that's what we can put in 140 characters. So Nicoletta, you get to take us home today. What is the tweet that our team should be paying attention to?
So I have prioritizing agriculture that works for people and planet is key to ensure a green and blue post-COVID recovery.
Prioritizing agriculture that works for people and planet, I think gets you to about 100 characters, Nicoletta, but I can see that you did one better and you put it in the chat as well, is key to ensuring green and blue post-COVID recovery. Thank you very much to each and every one of you for a really robust conversation, for engaging with the recommendations, but also adding an added layer through your own insights and expertise to our audience. In the chat, you will notice once again, we've put the hyperlink in there for you. You can get access to the report, you can get access to this recording, and of course, you can also get access to the presentation that Marco Sanchez forwarded to all of us. Lina says to us, money talks and the health of people and planet is or are at stake. I think it's a beautiful way to close off the conversation. For myself, Nozipho Shabalala, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's goodbye.